Welcome to Tuesday, January 13th, 2026. Grant Lawson and the law firm for truck safety want to remind everyone that dangerous conditions can happen in a flash on Wyoming roads. Give law enforcement and snow plows extra space to do their jobs. Please, for everyone's sake, when it's icy, snowy, and blowing, slow down and save lives. Beautiful shot there of a lenticular cloud over the Grand Teton. Northwest flow is a good pattern to get those lenticulars, and we've got a lot of northwest flow that's quite moist. That will be the topic for the next 24 hours or so. Then it's right back to this massive high pressure ridge over the western United States, which will dominate through the middle of next week. So it's got 7 to 8 days of life left into it. We will have a little bit of a northwest flow disturbance today, and there's going to be some rain and snow showers out on the plains. The Black Hills will get dusted by a little bit of snow. But as we have seen all winter, what we're going to see are not one, but two surges of Arctic air headed to the Midwest and the Great Lakes region. One salvo comes in later this week, another salvo late this weekend and early next week. That's going to send very cold temperatures all the way to Florida, and a lot of lake effect snows and a lot of wintry weather in the Midwest and East, while the big ridge of high pressure dominates here. So we're going to go through the same thing we did yesterday. Where's the ridge axis forecasted to be? Where is it now? And how will that play a role once this high pressure ridge begins to move and shift around a little bit? We're also going to talk about, and we've talked about this pattern before, but not a lot because it can get a little confusing and complicated, the Madden-Julian oscillation, or what we call the MJO. It's what we call a teleconnection. We show you teleconnections at times, like Arctic oscillations, the Eastern Pacific oscillation, the Pacific North American oscillation. These are very large-scale weather phenomenons that we know historically tend to lead to one pattern or another. But that has completely been upturned. The tables have been turned on teleconnections this winter. That's why it's been so frustrating. We've had teleconnections that say one thing, and they're usually pretty darn reliable. They really are. But we have these teleconnections that don't match with what the real world weather has been. And we'll talk about that here in a minute and give you a good example of that. Some beautiful photos of clouds, non-participating or precipitating clouds across the western United States, giving us a lot of color in the mornings and the evenings, along with a little bit of a flag that has seen some better days there. Of course, everybody that lives in the western high plains and Rockies has a flag that looks like that. I know that I do. As we take a look at the high pressure ridge developing, you can see the arc. See how the weather's going up, over, around, and down, but you might notice, wow, that's a lot of cloudiness right there. Well, there is. There is a patch of moisture that's come from the Pacific up, over, and down, and is coming on through. That's why there's going to be a lot of clouds, and there might very well even be a little bit of shower activity. Look how deep the precipitable water is. The normal water content is over 200% of average. And you're saying, well, shouldn't that mean a lot of rain and snow? Well, you can't take moisture and turn it into rain or snow unless you have colder temperatures and a good lifting mechanism to take advantage of it. There will be some lift and there will be some colder temperatures further east. So we're going to see this flow of air come around. So this is what's happening. The flow of air comes up, over, and down in that northwest flow. So it is going to produce some shower activity today and into Wednesday. We'll get a little bit of snow in the higher Black Hills and the higher Bighorns here. Maybe the snowing range gets a few snow showers, a few rain and snow showers out here in the Dakotas and Nebraska. But you can see out here, zip, 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 zero, nothing going on underneath that high pressure ridge. And where the jet stream is coming up over and down, portions of British Columbia and Alberta's mountains will get some precipitation. So this northwest flow will produce a little bit of weather today for you folks out there underneath the gray and the green. Then as we get into Friday, this is that bigger amplification of the high pressure ridge building all the way up to past Juneau. Then it comes down and we have a big pocket of cold air. So if you look at the axis of colder air here, It's really going to pour into the upper Midwest and Great Lakes again. This is by Friday. Now, the back edge of the colder air will get up to the Continental Divide. So for the Friday, Saturday time frame, it is going to cool off a bit on the western edge of this trough. But if you're west of the Continental Divide, you're in severe clear here from Vancouver to San Diego with this high pressure ridge. Might get a little bit of a Santa Ana wind here from this high to the low, but I don't think it'll be too bad. Then as we look at this highly amplified flow, all the cold air is going to get bottled up to right here. Then you see this little notch right here. This is going to swing in behind it. That's going to reinforce the Arctic air during the second half of the weekend, and especially by Monday and Tuesday into the eastern half of the country. So this is by Saturday. So you can see that the cooler air is coming in right to near the Continental Divide. So you get from the western high plains east, you can see the cold air that's pouring in, while the west is very warm underneath that high pressure ridge. Then this is a bigger amplification of the polar vortex. Whew, some really cold air over Hudson Bay. And follow the lines. Counterclockwise flow around the low, and the trajectory of the air is coming from Hudson Bay into the Corn Belt and the nation's heartland. So you can see where the cold is going to go again. And this has been a common theme all winter, to where these areas have seen the winter weather come in fits and surges. And when it has come in, it's been pretty intense. Well, look at the amplification of the high right here. That's by Monday. So the high maintains itself, and it maintains itself right along the west coast. So there's the ridge axis. We need it to move westward, but through the weekend and early next week, it stays where it is right now. So you can see the dagger. This is by Monday. The dagger of cold air that's coming in to the Great Lakes in the Midwest, where you see the purple, you're more than 30 degrees below the seasonal average. And if you're 30 degrees below the seasonal average or more in the middle of January, well, you're below zero. And that's going to send in some very cold air. So for playoff football, Saturday in Denver, Buffalo and Denver, kickoff temperatures will be in the 40s. For the Bears game in Chicago on Sunday, it'll be in the teens with light snow and flurries. So quite a bit of difference between two locations. And there you can see the sub-zero temperatures. The sub-zero temperatures are in gray. So you can see how far west the sub-zero temperatures can get, even getting into northern Iowa here, into northern Illinois by Monday morning. And then that cold air is going to continue to leak south and will get all the way to the Gulf Coast. Lake effect snows will break out. Heavy lake effect snows in Michigan, New York State, Ohio, northwest Pennsylvania, even parts of areas where the upstate New York, which has been very snowy this winter, even snow into the North Carolina mountains. And look at these temperatures in Florida by next Wednesday morning. Freezing temperatures all the way to near Tampa Bay, while the ridge in the west dominates. What happens after that? Well, here we go again. So I'm showing you the same maps I showed yesterday. Let's go through the same process. That's where the ridge axis is forecasted to be by next Thursday. That's much better. That's where it needs to be. That compares to where the ridge axis is now. Now, there's a lot of miles between these two lines, but on a North American map, they kind of look close. That's why we're always on the precipice from the edge of disaster to cold and snow in terms of how you view the winter season. If you've been loving all this warm and dry winter weather, you want the ridge axis to stay there. If you want winter to finally arrive, you want it to be on the left side there. So this map looks quite similar, quite good in terms of consistency between yesterday's charts. Then as we get into next Saturday, this is much colder. So the ridge axis is forecasted to be where it needs to be as compared to where it is now. But you can see, if the model decides to shift this ridge axis a little bit more to the east, then the Arctic air gets put into the Midwest and Great Lakes again. That's why I have the warning symbol here. Proceed with caution, as you should with every weather model and every climate model. Proceed with caution when you're out past 10 days. But what we do like is a couple of things. There's a lot of consistency run to run with the models in terms of having the ridge axis here. The European weeklies have been suggesting it. So All we have to do is wait. We just have to wait and see. But that's why I have the caution sign. We've seen this before. For those of you who are familiar with the Peanuts cartoons where Lucy has the football for Charlie Brown to kick it and she always pulls it away. Well, the models will do that to weather forecasters all the time. You have a very consistent model that goes for days and days and days. It says the same thing. And then right when the weather's about to change, Lucy pulls the football away and something changes. So we'll keep a very, very close eye on it, but proceed with caution. That's why I have this other caution symbol right here, because if that ridge axis ends up there, look at the temperature anomalies by next Friday into the high plains and into the Intermountain West. And that cold air will just get deeper into next weekend. But again, proceed with caution. I'm not saying that will happen. It's a possibility it'll happen. So let's talk about the Madden-Julian oscillation. Now this can get really complicated and the graphs and the charts are hard to read, but this is not John Madden from Madden Football. This is what we call the MJO, is a much better way to describe it. As you can see here in the description, it's a very important driver in terms of weather patterns will go through the course of any season, whether it's winter, spring, summer, or fall. This is what's crazy, and this is where you kind of have to wrap your brain around the fact that what happens here in your backyard is impacted by what happens in the ocean basins. We talk about the Pacific all the time for a good reason, but we also have to talk about the Indian Ocean. Now, if you want to talk about being really far away from somewhere between the Intermountain West and the Indian Ocean, that's pretty darn far. But during the course of any season near the equator, we always have active thunderstorms, really any time of the year. And when you have a lot of thunderstorms grouped together, or very active thunderstorms grouped together in the tropics, it causes an upward motion in the atmosphere where the thunderstorms will form. Now, keep in mind, this is very idealized, this graphic, but you get a general upward motion in the atmosphere near the surface up to the troposphere. Then that air spreads out. Okay, when the air spreads out, it has to sink and come back down. Eventually what it does, and this is where you get circulations, okay? And so what ends up happening is during the course of, let's say, the winter season, you have upward motion from the thunderstorms. The air goes out, spreads out, then sinks. Where you have sinking air, you have high pressure, you have dry and warmer conditions. Where you have the upward motion, you have low pressure, colder, wetter conditions. And what will happen through the course of any season is the thunderstorms might be here where the graphic shows it, but the thunderstorms might be here, which would move the high pressure to here. Or let's say the thunderstorms are more here, that moves the high pressure over to here along the equator regions, and that ends up impacting how the jet stream will perform, and it will end up impacting how weather systems will move across the northern hemisphere. So we have 8 phases to the Madden-Julian oscillation. We have a null phase, and then we have 8 other phases that go through there. These charts are hard to read, but when you see these numbers, that tells us what phase it is in. And when we have different phases, we tend to have particular weather patterns that happen during certain times of year based on historical trends by just looking at what has happened during these 8 phases. So when we get into phase 1, 4, 5, 6, or 7, we look at charts that show us, well, what usually happens. These numbers here are dates, and so the lines represent forecast. So here we are right here, where the last update here is the 12th, so you can see where the 12 is. So we're in phase 6. If you look at the forecast, it shows that we're going to stay in phase 6 for a few days. Then late next week, what happens? We go into phase 7. So what you do is you go to your handy dandy chart and you say, well, we're in phase 6, but this is where it's nuts. This is where things don't match with historical trends. So phase 6 of the Madden-Julian oscillation leads to cold weather in the Rockies and very warm, dry weather in the Midwest. But what did I just show you? If you're in a phase 6, it's supposed to be cold and snowy in the west. It's supposed to be warm and dry in the east. But what we're going to see, as I showed you earlier, is a big Arctic outbreak right here. So the weather is behaving 180 degrees on the teleconnection with the Madden-Julian oscillation to what's happening now. Does this happen? Yes. That's why you got to be very careful with these oscillations, because a lot of times they won't match. That's why you can't take them to the bank. But they're a good tool. Now we're going to phase 7. What does phase 7 say? Well, phase 7 says it gets very cold in the Rockies and the high plains, and it gets warmer in the east. Phase 7 and what I just showed you on the model match perfectly. Phase 7, the Manjuli oscillation, matches exactly with what the European models and other models are forecasting. So you have to say what gives, right? What's going on? It's been a crazy winter, as we all know. So will phase 7 match reality? Will the models match what they're forecasting? Boy, it's a flip of a coin, and confidence obviously is very low. Don't forget our regional travel forecasted, updated each Monday through Friday afternoons. Have yourself a good Tuesday. More for you tomorrow.